Good morning. Excuse me. I've already been coughing this morning, so I've got my I've got my drink nearby. Good morning, everyone. We have a really small group today, but hopefully a few more will be joining us. But certainly we'll have the recording as well for others to view. So welcome, welcome. I am Donna Murray. I serve as the Digital Accessibility Specialist at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. This is a fairly new position at the agency. I'm the first ever to serve in this role, and I've been in this position for about a year and a half now. And I can't tell just by looking at the names if everyone has, if this is your first webinar in the series that you've been able to join, or if you've joined the other two or one of the other two. But regardless, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about building an accessibility plan within your company. And we'll briefly talk about those first two webinars, and then we'll dive into this the content around building a game plan for addressing accessibility. So again, this is our webinar description for today. We're going to talk about building that roadmap. I'll share some example strategies for the different dimensions that we have as part of our self-assessment, and really just hopefully leave you with a lot of resources and some templates for you to use in your plan, knowing that every organization is going to be vastly different in how you have your teams structured, as well as the products that you develop. So I've tried to build out resources that will be kind of company agnostic, I guess, depending on all the different parameters of what makes your organization unique. So I didn't mention there's a shortcut link for this slide presentation at the top of the screen. I'll put the direct link into the chat as well, but the shortcut link is go.ncdpi.gov/access vendors plan. And as you'll see in this slide, we have links to previous webinars. I don't have the recordings up and posted yet because I'm still editing the transcripts for those, but you will have access to the recordings for all of the webinars as time goes by, once I have some time to clean up those transcripts and get those posted. But I do have the links to the presentations in linked into this specific slide if you'd like to access those. All right, let me jump back real quick and put a link to that slide deck in the chat. You don't have to pull that up right now, but certainly you'll want to bookmark that so you have access to some of the resources later on. So the first webinar that we had last week was just an introduction. And we talked about everything from some of the related laws like the ADA Title II. We talked briefly about some of the WCAG standards, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And we really just talked about kind of the foundation, the introduction to all things digital accessibility. And then the follow-up webinar, part 2 of the 6-part series, was about what's the current landscape? How do we address the current maturity level of our accessibility program in our company? And so there were a couple of resources that I shared for that. One was just kind of a guiding document that corresponded with the slide deck that I had created and shared, where we talked about some guiding questions around each of these 10 dimensions that I've developed. And then how do we assess our current landscape? And then a rubric to help us identify kind of where we are. And so that same, what am I trying to say? That same process as we were going through the presentation kind kind of covered those three things. So we talked briefly about the each of the dimensions and landed on that self-assessment with the challenge that if you were going to be able to join us this week, that hopefully you had a few minutes to go through that self-assessment and kind of get a good idea of that current landscape. Now, if you weren't able to join us last week, that's not a problem. You can certainly go back and dig into the self-assessment, but I think you'll find today that as we're going through, you can probably at least individually process where we are as a company, and go ahead and start applying that into the conversation today around the plan. But regardless, no matter where you are in this process, whatever your entry point is, hopefully these are resources that you can leverage to help develop a game plan moving forward. And then that rubric, we kind of, well, not we, I designed the rubric to kind of cover a range of entry points. So have we just not started it at all? Are we, kind of ad hoc work around that dimension? So is it developing? Is it established? Do we really have kind of some processes and workflows in place that are consistent, or is it really part of how we do business? And so I've labeled that one as embedded. So the rubric, of course, aligns with the 10 dimensions and those 4 levels. And this is just a list of those dimensions that I have in this maturity model. Everything from leadership to, how do we mitigate risks, to quality assurance and making sure that we understand and have some good processes for evaluating. And then, of course, everything else that you see listed here, even a lens into what does our continuous improvement plan look like? How are we going to sustain this work, knowing that we're going to be creating new products and that digital accessibility is going to not be a one and done project. So this is just a screenshot of that document that I shared just a moment ago, where just to give you an idea of what we covered last time, we were really just trying to define that current landscape, and this resource document was to help us process that. And I've already talked about the rubric. That's just a screenshot kind of defining those different levels. And so I've kind of covered this already, but just before we dive in, just let me reiterate that today we're talking about where do we start in making that plan. I have templates to share with you and a few example resources to share. And just want to reiterate that knowing all of our organizations are vastly different and how we are, how we're structured, what our vision is, what kind of products we're developing. I encourage you to take any of the content that I have and remix it to suit your needs. So feel free to edit, totally revise, take it as is, whatever works for you. Because as I was mentioning in last week's session, if you are in a small company, maybe you're a company of 4 or 5, then you can probably answer all of the questions in that self-assessment and probably come up with a game plan today, knowing all the inner workings of all of the different pieces of your company. But if you're a larger company where you have lots of teams moving in kind of in not in silos, but maybe staying in their lane, and maybe haven't talked cohesively, collaboratively about how accessibility should be addressed across those teams, then hopefully the templates and resources that I share will serve you as well. Maybe more so as is than needing a lot of edits. But again, what's mine is yours. Please take it, remix, do whatever works for you and your team. All right, so the 2 templates that I want to share with you today, the planning templates, one is designed as a document and the other one is designed as a spreadsheet. And they're similar in structure and content, but I wanted to make sure you had just some options, and certainly understand that you probably already have your own project management tools in place. And so this might be a moot point. Maybe you already have a good structure for how you're doing project management. But I at least wanted to make sure that you had a couple of templates in your tool belt related specifically to planning for accessibility. So let me throw the links into the chat for these documents. I do everything really in Google Docs, but if you're more comfortable using a Word document, you can certainly in the Google document download it into different formats. You can also go directly into File and make a copy. Excuse me, which is what I encourage you to do. So if you would like to make a copy and have that pulled up and be jotting down notes as we're talking today, feel free to do that, or you can just use this as a time to brainstorm, literally brainstorm, and then come back and use the template later if that suits. So the first link I put in the chat is the template for the document version. And the other one is, let me put this one in the chat, is for the spreadsheet. So let me just briefly talk about each of these, and then we'll dive into some strategies for your plan. So the document itself, the template, is designed similar in structure to the document I was sharing last week, where we've got each of the dimensions addressed. But what I've done here is just give you a space for you to, after you've gone through the self-assessment and decided where you are, what your current landscape is, then you can capture that data in here. You'll see I've just got things color formatted so that you can, at a quick glance, see kind of where you are. And then a place for you to capture your strengths and gaps and risks. And a couple of the resources that I'm going to share with you today are things like a risk assessment and, and some risk mitigation strategies. So again, this is just a place for you to capture your score for your self-assessment and a place to brainstorm, what are our strengths, where are our gaps, and what are our potential risks that we need to mitigate. Down below that, the next section is just, it's a basic action plan space, a place for you to denote, which dimension you might be working on, what are the related action items, and then of course, a place for you to build out who's going to be in charge of that and what your target date is for completion. And then also just a column for status. And then underneath that is just a place for you to capture, your periodic review of where you are and what you've accomplished, and then any challenges that you faced and next steps. So honestly, it's a pretty simplistic planning document, but again, just wanted to have a space for you in case this type of template works. This is a pretty basic, pretty generic project management tool for accessibility planning. Now let me jump over into the spreadsheet because it's a little bit, it's similar in content, but a little bit different in structure, and intended to kind of do some automated population of some strategies for you. So here's how I have the structure. The first tab is just kind of an overview of the different tabs that are included, as well as a link to directly make a copy of this template. And I also have a link to that Google Doc where you can make a copy of that as well. But let's talk about the different tabs that I've developed into this template. The tab next to the About tab is the self-assessment rubric. I shared last week a spreadsheet that looks very similar to this specific tab, where you've got your dimensions, you've got the rubric, and then you have a place to capture your score. This one's a little bit different, and then I'm having it auto-populate some example strategies. So if I go in here and select developing for leadership, then it's populating some strategies that I have already built out. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's just an example of some strategies that you might want to look at to help you move from where you are to the next level on the rubric. So again, it's nothing very fancy. It's just formulated to auto-populate those strategies. And I just realized I also have a document that has that full list of strategies. So I'll make sure I share that with you too. But this is just an interactive way for you to put in your self-assessment scores and then have those auto-populated example strategies. So the intent here is to say, here's where we are. Help us think about how to move from where we are into this maturity model and move forward and improve with accessibility. So again, this is the full rubric, place for you to put in your score, and then see some example strategies for growth, taking you from where you are to the next level. The next tab is just a blank action plan for that, for defining what's going to be your next steps. So again, you can choose your dimension. I have a place for action items, very similar to the document, a place to capture the current status, and then of course any notes. So this could be an interactive space for you as well, because as you're completing things, then you could sort and hide those those rows, and have this ongoing list of action items as you continue to grow. And then if it suits, I've added another tab where you can track your progress over time. So it's just a place for you to come in and populate. We started out as developing in leadership. We stayed there for a while, but then in the next quarter or whatever your periodic review time will be, we've shown improvement. So just a way for you to kind of track progress based on that self-assessment. So again, hopefully one of these two templates suits your needs. If not, use whatever strategy works best for you in designing the actual plan. Okay, now before, hold that thought just a minute. There's a document that I wanted to make sure I shared with you, and I don't think I linked it. So I'll go back and add it to the presentation as well, but let me grab that link. Donna Murray has way too many links here. Hold that thought. Okay, here we go. So this document, and again, it probably is linked somewhere in my presentation, but it needs to be front and center. So I'll go back and add that link. This is just a document that is basically the strategies, the rubric, the self-assessment rubric, and then those list of strategies that we're auto-populating in the spreadsheet. It's just listed right here. So again, just another way for you to approach this. Whatever works for you, you can kind of brainstorm some strategies from one of the two templates, or this kind of running document where I've listed those example strategies for growth. The other thing that I'm trying to do in here, and I'll be honest, I've not fully built this out yet. I think this will be an ongoing task for me, is to add external resources. So anything that relates to that particular dimension, I'm trying to start building out resources that are related. So I'll continue to add to that, and I have an updated timestamp at the top. So as I make additions, I'll try to make sure that I change that timestamp so that you can come back and visit this and see new resources as I find some. So you'll see that some dimensions don't have any resources listed yet. That's my fault. I just haven't had the capacity to go back in and add a bunch of resources lately, but I will continue to do that so that you have some external resources as well as some of the things that I've already developed that I'll share with you today. Okay, now let's jump in. So kind of the strategy that I have for the rest of our conversation today is really talking about each dimension and then giving you just a couple example strategies that are already captured in one of the three documents I just shared with you, but just to give you an idea of what you might do, how you might use that strategy as part of your action plan. So obviously this won't be an exhaustive list. We won't be going through every part of, jumping from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, or even just continuous improvement after you've embedded how you do business with digital accessibility in your company, but just kind of a general strategy that might be applicable really across levels, depending on what your entry point is to this work. So the first one is around leadership and strategic commitment. And again, our self-assessment is going from we haven't started anything. We don't really have this set as a priority to embedded this is how we do business. It's championed throughout our company, and we're addressing accessibility basically in all of the things that we're doing. So here are a couple of strategies that I just wanted to highlight as some quick examples to show you some things that you might put within your action plan. One is to create an official accessibility statement. And I know that that may sound simple or not really a big return on investment, just to have a statement out there that talks about your commitment. But it is important. I'll be honest, when I'm out there looking at products, when I'm looking at even just a news website, one of the things I'm looking for is have you articulated what your commitment is to ensuring that your content's accessible, or at least are you telling the story that it is a priority and here's what we're doing to work on improving, because we know we've got, we didn't address it proactively because maybe we just didn't know what we didn't know. But now that we're learning about accessibility, here's our game plan. And this is really what we're focused on. So the links that I have specifically in this slide are links that take you to my website to give you an example of resources that I've already created in sharing with the agency, with DPI, as well as some of our school districts. So the first one will take you to our public school units. That's what we call them here in North Carolina, our school districts, to some resources. And if I scroll down, I thought I had linked directly to this heading right here for the accessibility statement. It's close to the top. I've got planning and resources linked here, developed in this drop-down menus. And then just below that, in that light blue box, is where I've got a whole section on accessibility statements. So I have examples for, like an example language for an accessibility statement, but then also some best practices and then the benefits of having such a statement. So the intent here, again, is to be transparent about where you are and what your game plan is for improving over time. So it does, I think, allow some an opportunity to be transparent, to share some accountability, and this is where we are. We own where we are. We're being transparent about that, and we've got a game plan for moving forward. And if you have even further information about your accessibility work, maybe you've got a link to your accessibility conformance report, or you've got just a deeper dive into information about your commitment to accessibility, then certainly in your accessibility statement, you could link to that. Oftentimes, the accessibility statement can be found in the footer of the homepage. You may already have one. If you do, I encourage you to take a look. Let that be an action item, is to review that and see if it's still capturing the full story of what your commitment is to accessibility. So that's just an example resource with some sample language for creating that accessibility statement. Another strategy is just aligning accessibility to the goals that you have and the standards that you already have in place. So the example that I'm sharing here is very personal, because this is the document that I have drafted to tell the story of that alignment for digital accessibility in North Carolina education. So I created this really more as a personal tool for me to help me advocate when I'm talking about how accessibility aligns with things we already have designated as a priority, for standards that we already have in place, for strategic plans that we have already developed. And so I think there's a number of ways that you could use something like this, but for me, I haven't linked on my website, but honestly, it's really an internal advocacy document for me, so that when I'm making my case for digital accessibility, I'm prepared to say, this is how this ties into things that we've already identified as goals and strategies for improvement in North Carolina education. So you'll see that in my example here, I have built out pulling language from things like the Office of Digital Teaching and Learning at our agency, their strategic plan, anything that I could find within these plans, within these goals, within these standards that I think relates in some way, shape, or fashion to digital accessibility. So even our state school board plan, our strategic plan in North Carolina, we have uh, related to a decades long um, court case about ensuring equal access to high quality education in North Carolina, the Leandro case. We have a remedial plan to address the inequities for education in North Carolina. So I've even, pulled language from that to talk about how digital accessibility aligns. We have school improvement indicators in our NC STAR program. So I've tried to pull anything that I think might relate to digital accessibility, align with that through the NC STAR standards. So you can see, again, it's just a place for me to capture thinking about everything from state school board goals to a portrait of a graduate competencies that we have in North Carolina. How does it relate? And it's a great advocacy point, but I think through a lens of a company, opportunity for you to articulate and share publicly. This is how digital accessibility is tied into what we consider as our goals and our priorities in our work. So those are just a couple examples of some things that you might include within your growth strategies for leadership and strategic planning. And friends, I forgot to mention, I know we've got a pretty small group, so please feel free at any time to unmute, get my attention, or put something in the chat if you have any questions, and I'm happy to adjust our conversation today based on the needs of the group. Okay. All right, so the next dimension is around risk management. And so if you were able to join us last week, I shared a risk management matrix that I had developed for school districts, for the agency. And I said this, you could certainly kind of take that and make a few revisions to it, specifically through the lens of a vendor in your company. But I actually, since last week, took some time to make a new version of that risk assessment, or the risk management tool. So again, the intent here is, do we have any idea what our risks are? Do we have any game plan for how to mitigate those risks? Or is that kind of, again, how we do business? It just becomes part of the conversation. When we're talking about risks, we're including addressing risks when it comes to digital accessibility. So I mentioned that I shared a different version with you last week, but I have created one specifically for your lens, and that is linked into that slide. So again, just kind of highlighting some of the risks, what that potential impact might be for you as a company, and then some strategies to help mitigate that. And you'll see that some of the strategies that are listed here are things that we're addressing in some of the growth strategies that I've included in the corresponding documents today. So hopefully you'll see that we are mitigating some of these risks when we in our game plan moving forward. But this risk document is specifically for you through the lens of a vendor. And I also have on my procurement page some what I call common issues when it comes to that whole procurement process. These are really some personal experiences, but I've linked to them here as a way for you to maybe take a look at some of those common issues and see if there's any action items to help you address those within your company. So for example, a narrow focus on accessibility. One of the things that I often find, excuse me, is that accessibility for a product is usually only addressed through the lens of one user interface. So, excuse me, here I go having a coughing fit. So, for example, if I have a student-facing platform, generally the accessibility information is telling me the story of the accessibility for that interface alone. But oftentimes there's multiple interfaces. There might be a mobile app. There might be a parent or an administrator or a teacher facing side of that platform to track data. And so what I find is that oftentimes the focus is on one user interface or one user group instead of really addressing the full scope of all of the pieces of a product. So that's an example issue. So of course, my guidance for addressing that is to make sure that we're evaluating all those different user interfaces and platforms. Some of the other things are things like lack of accessibility demonstrations. It's interesting to me that we have a lot of statewide procurements and sometimes we don't even demo the product or ask the vendor to demo the product. So as a company, I would advocate, I encourage you to advocate for an opportunity to demo because it gives us an opportunity to ask questions and see in real time how you have what functionality you have for accessibility built within the system. So anyway, these are just some common issues that I have come across in my work with digital accessibility, especially through the lens of procurement. So as you're thinking about risk management, I encourage you to take a look at those and be thinking, are there any specific action items that we can do to help avoid some of those issues? The links on the right are just a couple of links that I thought might be helpful for you as you're thinking about risk management. The ADA Title II rule, this is, if you're not familiar with it, then I encourage you to make sure when the recording comes out for the first webinar, the introduction, that you take some time to look through that. But this website is the ada.gov website that specifically talks about the rule. It's a good kind of, I was going to say a one pager. It's probably longer than a one pager, but it's the full rule is like 300 pages long. So this is the short version and has some helpful tips and strategies for addressing it. Essentially, the ADA rule is saying that the Americans with Disabilities Act that's been in place since 1990 now has a technical standard when it comes to digital content. So this new rule that came out in 2024 says for Title II, which means any state and local government entities, which is why I'm doing this specific webinar for vendors, is that now there's a technical standard. So there's some clarification on when we say it needs to be accessible to people with disabilities, what does that mean? Well, now there's a technical standard. It's an industry standard, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's the standard that's been set within this new rule. And there's a short timeline to start complying with this new rule. And that depends on the size of a city or a county, their census data. So our smaller cities and counties, less than 50,000, actually have 3 years from the time that this was published. So they have until April of 2027. But some of our larger cities and counties that are over 50,000 population only have 2 years, and one of those years has already ticked on by. So April of 2026 is the expectation for the beginning of compliance. So this website just kind of helps you understand, how does this relate to the customers that we have in state and local government, and gives you some ideas for how cities and not cities and counties, how local and state government entities, including education, public education districts, how they are going to have to work on addressing accessibility through their work. And then, of course, you can take a look at that and think of how that's going to impact you as a company. And then the last link here, I encourage you, there's also an Office of Civil Rights link that I meant to add in here. This is there we go. This is the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. I encourage you to take a look at some of the digital accessibility related cases that complaints that have gone through that the Department of Justice has had to address. And I encourage you to take a deeper dive into that when you have time and think about what were the issues, what are some common issues that kind of continue to bubble to the surface in all of these complaints, and then what were the potential solutions for that? How did how did these organizations or companies have to work to overcome those issues? So again, along with risk management, I think understanding the current landscape, the current legal landscape is important, and that link hopefully will help you with that. One of the things that I do when I'm doing trainings with school districts is I'll have them look at North Carolina school districts who have had an Office of Civil Rights complaint. And the intent is not to, to air out dirty laundry and throw school districts under the bus. The intent is to say, let's learn from each other. So, for example, I have one district that had an Office of Civil Rights complaint specific to a curriculum platform. It was generally it's the website. Most of our OCR complaints for school districts and even at DPI itself have been specifically about the website, something about some web pages being inaccessible. But there was one school district where their complaint was very specific to a digital interactive curriculum program. And it was actually during the pandemic when all of our students were joining virtually. So it was a line in the sand. This student was not able to access any part of their education specific to that curriculum program because that was the full scope of the curriculum resources that were being used. And so what came of that is that district was able to identify some or to develop some processes to make sure that as they were checking things off during procurement, that they weren't only looking at does it align with standards? Is it are we addressing cybersecurity and data privacy issues? But now they've added in a layer that is specific to an accessibility review. So it's kind of it's part of their approval process now. So we can learn from that. And that's what I intend when I'm sharing links like these disability rights cases. It's not to draw attention to those who have done it wrong. It's to help understand how others have worked on improvement and take those lessons and apply them to our work. Okay, so the next dimension is roles and responsibilities. And I shared, I think actually in both of the webinars that I've done so far, I've shared this specific link, which talks about roles and responsibilities specifically through the lens of vendors. And the intention here is for you to think about what do the roles and responsibilities look like for each of the teams within my company. From product development teams to our QA team to the project management team and so on, even to sales and marketing to customer support, all of the above. And so I tried to articulate what would be some example roles and responsibilities for each of those teams. And then I've also tried to start building out some example ways that they could cross collaborate. So, for example, it's going to be important for our quality assurance team as they're doing some evaluations and making sure everything is accessible, that they're working closely with product development so that that's going to inform future design. So this is just, again, your company, your organization I'm sure differs from any other organization that is represented on this call today. But hopefully there's a way that you can translate this into the inner workings of how your teams are structured. And I dare say that you're probably still going to be in some way, shape, or fashion still having these various teams in your organization. So hopefully you can take this and remix it and help you identify what are those roles and responsibilities within all of the staff in our organization. So that's just an example resource to help you identify what those roles and responsibilities might be for your staff. And certainly I think you could build out some action items specifically for that, especially if that's not something that you've addressed before now. All right, for the next dimension, product and content development, we were talking about in this one specifically for our team of developers on, whether or not we're addressing accessibility at all, or are we retroactively when there's an issue, or is that when we're addressing it, or is it how we do business from, the full project um, timeline, all of our phases of our project or product development, we are addressing accessibility and evaluating as we go. So one of the resources I just wanted to point out to you as a resource that you might could use as a way to improve in this area is a web page that I have in my website about creating accessible digital content. Now, this website is pretty basic in terms of kind of an intro level I was going to say intro level introduction. that's that's not right. It really is though just an intro level overview. There we go. Of some general strategies for accessibility, things like ensuring that you've got effective color contrast. What does that mean? How do we do it? Why is it important? But it is, I think, a good space, especially if you've got folks on your team where the level of knowledge around accessibility is really absent. If they're starting from scratch, then this is just I hope, a great place to start to get them to understand some of those very basic general strategies that are probably going to be applicable no matter if we're working on an interactive platform for users or if we're talking about a Google document or a basic web page. These are some general strategies that really apply in most digital content cases. So that's just an example. If you're working with product and content developers and they're just starting to wrap their arms around what are we talking about, then that web page is just an example of that's kind of a place to kick off from. Actually, I think there was a link that I shared in last week's webinar that went directly to a web page that was specific for developers to help them understand not just the strategy, but also to think about through the lens of their work, what does this mean for development? So I'll try to remember to go back and add that link in here specifically. But remember too that I'm also going to be adding resources into that running document page that talks about growth strategies. So I encourage you to take a look at that periodically to see what additional resources have been added. All right, the next one is quality assurance and evaluation. And so this one kind of goes in line with with there's some overlap, I guess is the short way of saying it. So when we talk about quality assurance and evaluation, when we're talking about product development, we also need to be talking about evaluation. When we're talking about communication and documentation, we need to be talking about evaluation. So there is some overlap here, but the intent with this specific dimension is to say, do we have set processes? Is it how we do business that we're testing frequently, that it's part, again, related to the last dimension, that it's part of how we do business when we're designing and developing? Is there a good feedback loop between our QA team and our development team? So this specific dimension around QA and evaluation, a couple of growth strategies and resources that I've linked here. One is about automated accessibility testing tools, because that absolutely, when we're thinking about evaluation, especially ongoing evaluation, it's great to have that threefold evaluation strategy where we're doing some automated testing. There's some great, easy to use automated tools out there to help us with that. But knowing that that can't catch everything, because there's still going to be a need for us to do some manual checking. And then as well as engaging users with disabilities. So all three of those are equally as important as the others in ensuring that we're really doing a thorough evaluation of our content. But when we think about doing a lot of iterations of evaluation over time, those automated checkers are so important to help us really get a quick view of how we're progressing with accessibility. So one of the things that I have created for North Carolina education that I think might be hopefully will be beneficial to you too, is this automated checker evaluation. Let me try that again. The accessibility evaluation using automated tools what those can do and what they can't do, because there are some great benefits of using those automated checkers, but it's important to recognize that, it can help, especially when I'm doing some bulk evaluations very quickly, but it cannot bring that human context. Not yet, anyway. I'm curious to see where AI takes us in this world, but currently it can't look and say, well, this alt text that you've put for this image is not really effective. It's not able to take the context and make sure that I've written effective alt text. It might be able to tell me that I have some alt text, but it's not going to be able to tell me if it's effective or not. So this is just kind of an overview of, what those automated testing tools can do versus what they can't do. And that might be an action item for your plan as you're thinking about how are we going to use those automated tools as part of our process. Okay. If you've joined any of my other two webinars, you know that I encouraged you today to mark off on your calendar an extra 5 or 10 minutes, because historically Donna Murray is classic for going over time. And I see the time ticking away, so I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit, but just know that if in 14 minutes you need to jump off the call, the recording will be available so that you can hear the Donna's overflow, because that seems to be the classic way that Donna operates. I obviously did not manage my time well. All right, so the next strategy for quality assurance that I have here is just pointing you directly to the web page that I have for strategies for evaluating content. And you'll see that I address all three of those pieces: the automated checks, using the automated tools, the manual check, and I have a corresponding document that kind of walks you through some basic manual checks to do. And then I have a whole section here on engaging users with disabilities. And a lot of these, well, not a lot, all of these, when I initially created them, were intended to help support like our school districts and DPI in engaging users with disabilities. But a lot of these can absolutely be remixed or even used as is to help you plan how you want to engage with users with disabilities. So what I was trying to do here was just create some quick templates that you could repurpose for invitations to ask users with disabilities to engage in giving you some and trying out your product and then giving you some feedback, as well as even some more structured evaluations where you're potentially providing a stipend or some sort of incentive for users with disabilities to come and spend some time with your product and then give you some important feedback to inform your future development. So these are just some resources that might be helpful to you. It's part of this full page of how to evaluate for accessibility. So communication and documentation is really about ensuring that we're transparent in sharing, again, what our kind of current landscape is. That might be through something like a completed VPAT, the voluntary product accessibility template, also called an accessibility conformance report, but also making sure that we have documentation that is updated regularly. So oftentimes, not often, that's not fair. Sometimes when I'm working in a statewide procurement team, there is an accessibility conformance report, but the product has had many iterations since the last time they've evaluated it. Well, at that point, that accessibility conformance report really doesn't tell me anything, because you're not telling me the current landscape. So just ensuring that, your communication, your documentation, making sure that you're as transparent as possible is just so important to ensuring that we're on the same page about the accessibility of the solutions that you're offering. One of the things that's included in part of this is ensuring that users with disabilities have a way to report if they've come across an accessibility issue, and that there's a game plan in place for how you're going to address that. What's your process for addressing accessibility issues, as well as just ensuring that in the meantime, until we have that fixed, what are the options for accessing content that they need? So I'm just pointing you in the direction of my website again, where on my PSU resource page, down below the accessibility statement, is a section where I've developed an example workflow that you might could use. So helping, having an articulated process in place for how to address accessibility issues, who's going to be in charge of that, what's the time frame, how often are we going to touch base with the user to give them an update. This is just an example workflow that might be beneficial to you as you're thinking about how you're going to address accessibility issues that users might report. All right. So for procurement, we've kind of talked about this in a few of the dimensions so far, but this is about ensuring, as a working at DPI, when I'm on the procurement team, I know what my lens is and what I need to be asking vendors to share about their accessibility functionality. But I think it's important that vendors start proactively sharing that information and making sure that it's part of their response when they're replying to an RFP, or making sure that they are proactively addressing where accessibility is going to fit within the contract language. Because honestly, there's a lot of state and local government entities, including education, that don't understand the full scope of their responsibility when it comes to complying with the CAG standards or ADA Title II, or just to ensure that their content is accessible to all of their users. So you can take the lead in that. So what I have here are just a couple examples of some, for example, sample contract language that you might want to consider as language that you might want to advocate for including within a contract with a customer. So I've got everything from just kind of a short narrative to broken down by focus area. Who's, if something's not accessible, who's going to be in charge of the associated costs? Who's going to be responsible for prioritizing what those accessibility needs are? So that's just some sample language. The other link that I have here is a whole document that I have. It's pretty comprehensive for vendors on how to create an effective accessibility conformance report. Now, you are welcome to dig into this, but if you are going to join future webinars in this series, our next webinar is going to be specifically about how, as a vendor, do I need to, first of all, what is the VPAT? And then what do I need to consider when I'm completing that VPAT to make sure that it's really addressing everything it needs to address. So this is a pretty comprehensive document to help you go through that. But in our next webinar, we will kind of chunk this and talk about the highlights of how to ensure that your accessibility conformance report is really helpful for you and for your customers to really understand the landscape. So for procurement and contracting, I've got the sample contract language there, and then of course the full resource on creating an effective ACR. The next dimension is internal capacity building. And this is just about ensuring that we are growing professionally and understanding accessibility and our role in accessibility. So I have a few resources here that I thought might be beneficial to you. There's a couple of these are, let's see, let me get to this one too. A couple of, out of the 3 resources, 2 of them are external, and then the other one is a resource that I've created. So this is just an example web page from I can't remember what PEAT stands for. See if it's at the bottom. Nope, I can't remember. But it's basically about accessibility for through the lens of an employer. And so thinking about your company, I felt like the resources that were being shared here are great to think about for the lens of your staff. What are our different teams? What are their roles? And then how could we provide some professional learning for those different teams to ensure that they understand through their specific scope of the work how accessibility relates to their role. So there's example resources in here. There's some external links as well as some internal links to the PEAT website to help you understand not only digital accessibility, but also some of those specific standards. So, some of these may align with some of the teams that you have within your organization. Some of them may not suit, but there were enough examples here that seem to align with what I imagine are the teams in your organizations. So I thought it would be just a great external resource for you to dig into, to find some resources to share for professional growth. The other external link that I have, and this is the website itself is not very it's probably meeting accessibility requirements, but to me, it's not easy on the eyes. But I will say that this has been a big win for me. This is a newsletter that you can sign up for. It's just an automated newsletter. And every day I get an email in my inbox that really does a deep dive into one of the WCAG standards. Now, I'll be honest, sometimes that email comes and I don't even open it and the day goes by. But sometimes when I have the capacity to do so, I can open that email and really spend time digging into one of the standards, one of the WCAG standards. So I try to pay attention when those come in and see if it's addressing a standard that I'm not fully familiar with. But I love the way those emails are structured, because it's kind of a deep dive, but also digestible, easy enough to dig into, and rather than just going to the WCAG standards webpage and being overwhelmed with all the standards, this is just kind of a tap on the shoulder every day to say, hey, let's learn a little bit about a WCAG standard today. So if you're interested, I encourage you to sign up for that if you don't mind one more email in your inbox every day. And then the other resource that I have here is a running list of potential newsletter articles that I've developed around this is just the table of contents at the top, around various topics and subtopics. And so literally, if you've got, especially like an internal newsletter or an opportunity to even if it's just a team email that you send out weekly, this could be a copy paste. So I have tried to build out some chunked content that's kind of a quick overview with a few tips and tricks on some various accessibility topics. Basically, most of these are a specific strategy or sub-strategy where you could copy and paste and share this with folks on your team. So this will continue to grow. I haven't updated it in a while, but you can see it's pretty comprehensive already. So I encourage you to take a look at those and share those as you see fit. Okay, 3 minutes left. Here we go. User engagement and feedback. This very much aligns with something we've kind of talked about multiple times, where we're engaging with users, specifically users with disabilities, but a variety of users with disabilities, so that we're really getting a good feedback loop to inform how we're going to design and develop and remediate our products for accessibility. So I've already shared this resource, so I won't even click on it for now, but this is that web page that I had those example templates that you could use to help you with having some of those user focus groups to engage with users with disabilities. All right, so continuous improvement. This is the last dimension, so I'm not too terribly over time. I have a video here we won't watch. It's just about a minute long, but when we talk about continuous improvement as its own dimension, in each of the dimensions we've talked about how we need to grow and make it to embedded. It's how we do business. But I included a continuous improvement dimension itself, because I think it's important that we very specifically address how we are going to sustain this continuous process of evaluating and ensuring that when we're onboarding new staff, that it's part of the conversation, that we're continually, as we're making new iterations of our product or new products all together, that we've got a sustainable plan in place. And so one of the things that I've included as a strategy for continuous improvement is to continue working on that culture of accessibility innovation. And so this video is just an example of a deaf person who signs, and he says, I have an idea. This is what I want companies to do, specifically like an AI company to do. I want someone who's going to create a voice for me that will translate, that's kind of, a translator for me that captures my personality. Because in this video, you can tell he's very energetic. And he was like, anytime I have a new interpreter, I am basically their personality and it doesn't match mine. So sometimes I might be, very enthusiastically talking about something, but it's not being captured because that interpreter is not really portraying my personality. Excuse me. I think my voice has said it's 11 o'clock on the dot and you're done. Excuse me. So my point is, we need to listen to our users and really engage in their user journey and understanding what their user needs are, and let that drive our innovation. So when you're doing that, don't forget about your users with disabilities. Excuse me. And if I can get through the next few slides, this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Judy Heumann. She passed away, I think, sometime last year. She's called the godmother of disability rights. And so her journey in advocating for people with disabilities and having equal access to not only physical spaces, but digital content, obviously was a very long journey. And I'm sure at some points felt like things weren't happening. You just get to the point where you advocate and advocate, and then you feel like you're just stuck in the mud. And this is those encouraging quotes that keeps me going sometimes. So as you're thinking about building out your accessibility plan, I encourage you to think about Judy Heumann's quote, and allow me, please, just to a moment to read it to you. Change never happens at the pace we think it should. It happens over years of people joining together, strategizing, sharing, and pulling all the levers they possibly can. Gradually, excruciatingly slowly, things start to happen. And then suddenly, seemingly out of the blue, something will tip. And you'll probably hear me share this quote again in the webinar where I talk about collaboration with state and local government and ed organizations and how important that is. And I argue that it's that type of partnership where we're learning and growing together. We're supporting one another as a vendor and as a state and local government entity. Those are the types of levers that ongoing work that you're doing, the ongoing work that we're doing with accessibility. Those are all those levers. That's the strategizing, that's the sharing. And I'm telling you that I've been working in this landscape well beyond the year and a half that I've been in this specific role, but I'll tell you that I'm feeling things start to tip. There's lots of movement with accessibility, and it's kind of the snowball now, and we're picking up traction, and we're picking up speed, and we're picking up snow. And I really feel like it does seem suddenly out of the blue that things are starting to tip, and you are such an important part of that organic movement to ensure that everyone has access. Okay. If you've joined any of the webinars, this is not your first time seeing this picture, so forgive me for a repeat. But if you're new to the webinar series, I like to tell a personal why that I have for the drive to ensure that all content is accessible. This is my daughter, Olivia. She is almost 20 years old, and she is a complete mystery to us. She has physical disabilities as well as cognitive disabilities. She also has absolutely no sleep pattern. Currently, she is home from school today because she did not go to sleep until about 8:30 this morning, from last night. So that I'll ask for grace in why I feel like I can't complete a proper sentence today. It's because I'm horribly sleep deprived. But she's our mystery girl. She said her alphabet backwards when she was 3, but she's never called me mama. There's so much going on in this child's brain that I may never fully be able to grasp. But my job as an educator and as a parent is to remove as many barriers as I can for her. so that I pave the way for her to not hit those barriers and be able to access information, to communicate in whatever way works best for her. Removing those barriers is really what we're talking about here. Yes, you may say, well, we don't really have a lot of users that are, have a hearing or vision impairment, so this really isn't applicable. One, you don't know that. There's a lot more folks with invisible disabilities or aren't transparent in sharing about their disabilities. And there are millions of people just in the United States who have various types of disabilities. So one, don't hang your hat on, well, we don't have those kind of users, because I guarantee you do. But beyond that, this is about good user design. This is about ensuring the Olivias of the world, the Donna Murrays of the world who are sleep deprived and really need content to be easy to navigate and focus on because she's perpetually sleep deprived. It's about ensuring that the content that the products you're creating are removing barriers proactively so that your users can use and access the great things that you've developed. So it's not going to happen overnight. As you're working on your action plan, please don't get overwhelmed with the full scope of the work. Start somewhere. It really is about progress over perfection, and it's about being as transparent as we can so that we can grow and learn together. I have a link in here that will take you to my website. You've got lots of links to specific pages today, but this is the main webpage link and a screenshot that shows you some of the buckets of resources you'll find. If you are an ed tech vendor, I mentioned last time that One Ed Tech is an organization that has put forth kind of an industry standard for a self-assessment. Similar to what we've talked about today, it's not nearly the depth. I was engaged in the work around the self-assessment, so I created some corresponding resources, and I have those linked in this slide. So if you are an ed tech vendor and you're interested in that particular self-assessment, this webpage this slide will take you to the corresponding information. Okay, 7 minutes over. I apologize. This is a wrap up for today's session, but join me on the 25th, where we will talk about that accessibility conformance report. Then we'll talk about collaboration on April Fool's Day. And then we'll wrap up this series for our ed tech vendors if you're interested in learning some very specific information about how to ensure that student facing digital content is accessible. Okay, friends. Thank you for joining us. And I'll finish with the original slide in case you want to jot down that shortcut link. And thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you at the next one. I'll follow up with an email with all of the links to the recordings once those are finalized. Thanks everyone. And again, if you're joining one of the future webinars, hold your calendar for about an hour and 15 minutes. That seems to be the standard for me right now.